It's September 23rd, 2021. I'm Dana Durnford, nuclearproctologist.org is where I hang my shingle. That site is for you, so you can get educated. You can call in, or you can call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 709-589-4406. I'm here for you. If you got a question and I can answer it or find the answer, I will. I can't answer the phone all the time because I do sleep. I am human. Hope everybody's doing good. Let's jump into it. There's so much to get through. One good thing about these types of shows, as if there's anything good about these types of shows, is it's not where you're describing nuclear, where you got to go into great detail and academic studies and everything else, right? So you kind of just run through the material, but there's a lot of material. We've done another show of the same type on the 11th, I think it was, of this month. So it's a quick turnaround. So Fukushima nuclear meltdowns. They're going to talk about. They talk about tanks. There's 1,000 tanks, but there was 1,000 tanks in 2013. There's 1,000 tanks in 2021. So what's going on here? Well, if you count the tanks, there's actually only 750. But they want you to think about the tanks. But they don't want you to think about what's already happened. This is a plume model. That's just the Pacific Ocean, and that's America. And way up there would be Canada. And you can see the plume, though, it's continuously coming out. So don't worry about the tanks, because within 7 days, the entire Pacific Ocean was buried in fission products from a nuclear meltdown. So oil, gas, and coal emissions don't do this. This is unique. This is also global warming. That's pulsing energy every second. It is circles the entire planet. Here's another model from NOAA. I speeded it up, but it's based on 40 days. It doesn't include all the isotopes or even most of the isotopes. It's just venting. It wasn't the actual nuclear meltdown inventory. But what you're seeing is the entire northern hemisphere. But if it goes another 40 days, it'll be the entire southern hemisphere. As you notice in those two models, it never stops coming out. It's still doing that. And so what they're trying to do is get you to look somewhere else. Think about the tanks. And now the tanks are actually empty, believe it or not, because if you actually fill up a tank, you're talking about 1.4 million Seabirds per tank. You actually couldn't build another tank on the site. And you can't get back on the site. And it's only the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society. Now, I'd done presentations on the tanks last week, 2 different shows, and gave you documentation you're not going to find anywhere else. Okay, and so if you're going to be eating Japanese food, remember 55 countries banned the radioactive food in over half of Japan. They want you to think it's just Fukushima Prefecture, which is hideously as it is, but it's actually half of Japan is radioactive, or the whole country is radioactive, but half is confirmed, where countries won't take the food. But in the last couple of days, we've seen the United States, from all 14 prefectures, yep, go ahead, kill us. And the same thing with the EU, and now Iceland and Norway is going to follow suit. That's frightening that a handful of people can make that decision. Western media hasn't reported on this. That should terrify you. So since those nuclear meltdowns, since that radioactive fallout, we're seeing incredible die-offs. We're seeing mink whales, unusual mortality events, for the Atlantic Ocean. We're seeing the Pacific Ocean gray whale unusual mortality event, which actually spills over into the Atlantic. We're seeing humpback whales unusual mortality events throughout the Pacific and the Atlantic. As you've seen, the radioactive fallout was symmetrical for the entire northern hemisphere. And the North Atlantic right whale unusual mortality events, they all have one thing in common, is they're all emaciated. And if you get a lot of radiation in your body, you too will be emaciated. So will birds and insects and mammals and animals. Nothing is immune from this plague, the atomic plague. So this is the atomic plague, one of many media. And she's going to try to convince you, this is the network, is going to try to convince you that the building doesn't look like that. It actually, they're going to try to convince you it looks like this. That's unprecedented, right? That's unprecedented.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011, leading to the country's worst nuclear disaster.
Now, those buildings to the right is fake. They're not even in Japan, let alone at Fukushima. They have 70 of these reactors in the United States. So why did they fake the building to the left? Why would the big medias worldwide do something like that?
The fact that the reactor in Japan is 100 times more powerful than the one in Chernobyl, and
that was just a couple of days after. RT was saying that the reactors in Japan are 100 times more powerful. They were the biggest in the world, but they were using pure uranium, pure plutonium. Whereas Chernobyl, which was brutal, don't get me wrong, 3 million children with permanent disabilities. They closed 9,000 farms in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom because of the radioactive fallout. Radioactive fallout is real, and they've hidden it away from you. But at the top of the reactor buildings were fuel pools. They have decades of reactor cores. It's a catastrophic. Literally, the stupidest thing you can do was put the fuel pools at the top of the building, and that's what the nuclear industry has been doing. Chernobyl was a brand new reactor and didn't have that type of attributes, but Fukushima had multiple reactors melt down with decades of reactor cores. So the fallout was brutal, and it affected the whales, the mammals, the animals, the insects, the birds, and it still will, and until they're extinct, which is maybe, I'm surprised they last this long. Now the ocean currents, for instance, I showed you the airborne plumes, right? The ocean current is actually real, and it takes about 45 days at 5 miles per hour, 24 hours a day, times 45 days, means it crosses the Pacific Ocean. So if it was only going into the Pacific, the currents will actually bring over anthropogenic pollution from the Asian pre-Fukushima in 45 days. So why then are they saying it takes 7 years for the radiation? But it actually doesn't.
May be worse than thought. Studies from last year indicate that radioactive water will contaminate the entire Pacific Ocean in just 6 years. Kim Min-ji reports.
This graphic shows the gradual contamination of the Pacific Ocean due to leaks of radioactive water from the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan. The simulation, which was run by a German marine research institute, shows the entire Pacific waters being polluted by radioactive water in just 6 years.
But it actually only takes 45 days. But the problem was, it was airborne. So when it covers the ocean in 7 days, which means it's covered from the surface all the way to the ocean floor and the troposphere. And they have numerous models showing that is how that works. Here's one more model. So, but March the 16th, it covers the entire northern hemisphere. In a 40-day cycle, it circles the entire planet. But the problem was it just kept coming out. It was a continuous plume. That's global warming, by the way, pulsing energy every second for millions of years. Let's get her going. So they were showing you the tsunami map over there from NOAA. Both of these are NOAA. That's the dispersal from NOAA of radiation, but that's the tsunami. So they were shoving that down everybody's throat. Oh my God, look at the Fukushima plume. And then people would get in the comments section go, shut up, stupid, which would be the same people. That's just a tsunami map. But they didn't show you there was an actual radioactive plume from the same organization known as NOAA. That was one way of tricking you and deceiving you. There was 2,000 students in Taiwan, nuclear students, that spent the next couple of years spamming the internet, trying to convince everybody in comment sections that radioactive fallout was like a banana and a potato chip. It was, in other words, harmless, or like natural stuff. Students, 2,000 students, nuclear students, spent several years spamming the internet, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and everywhere else. This is how the nuclear industry actually works. They hate us for some reason, and they hate the species. We might as well reciprocate. Newspaper ignores the scientific model that shows the Fukushima radiation impacting the west coast and fails to inform the readers by only reporting on the discredited tsunami height map. And so I got both of them there together, both of them from the same organization. They were shoving that down everybody's throat, the tsunami, saying it was radiation, and then calling them idiots when they repeated it, when there was actually... Here we go. So, celebrated physician, Fukushima has humanity on the brink of a possible worldwide nuclear holocaust. Worldwide nuclear holocaust. I'm just going to try to paint you a picture, so when I start doing all the stories, you can wrap your mind around it. The world as we know it has changed. So the radioactive fallout is what kills the planet. And because they want you to believe a nuclear war, for instance, the sun would disappear under the smog for 10 years, nothing would grow and everything would perish, right? That was actually an academic study that was published by two people. And Hollywood and the media has gone mad with that particular version. That's not how it works. The models I showed you of the radioactive fallout is how it actually works. And we know this because we've had nuclear wars. It was called nuclear testing. So Castle, Bravo, and the Bikini Atolls, just that one nuclear weapon was equal to 1,000 Hiroshimas. It's the equivalent to Russia and China firing 500 Hiroshima nuclear weapons at each other. The radioactive fallout is the exact same. But the sun didn't disappear. And all the plants didn't wither and die. But what we're seeing is we can trace global warming from these events, and we can trace the decline of the species on the planet from the nuclear testing and nuclear accidents, nuclear dumping. But Fukushima was a different monster altogether. Now, I've done research expeditions on both coastlines of Canada. This is Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, to Alaska, 27,000 islands. For 6 years, I plied those waters doing species counts, and it's an extinction event. And this is really important because when the birds used to fly along the coastline used to look like that. So if they were hungry, the birds can land anywhere and get a meal. But it doesn't look like that anymore because of Fukushima, and now it looks like this. So the birds flying along the coastline can't find their migratory fish, could normally land over there and get all the food they want, right? There was incredible diversity. So the birds can land anywhere and they can get nutrition. The seals can come ashore and get nutrition. There was this entire ecosystem, a massive, incredible ecosystem. But it was wiped out, and I know because I went there to the same places as those pictures, and I was a commercial diver who dove this coastline, was very knowledgeable of the entire coastline. So it wiped out all the species. So when the birds are flying along the coastline, can't find the migratory shrimp or krill, rather, or the herring or anchovies or squid or sardines or, the migratory animals, they would normally just go along the coastline and there would be a smorgasbord waiting for them, right? Everywhere they go, there would be incredible, unbelievable diversity. There was no way that they can end up emaciated. We've never seen that. That's a post-Fukushima thing. Because of the radioactive fallout, I'll speed this particular model up. To your left, that's the Pacific Ocean, and in the center is the Atlantic Ocean. You can see the whole northern hemisphere. The model stops short, but it doesn't, just because the model stopped, don't mean the plume did. So the birds can't find any food on the coastlines anymore. Therefore, they're showing up emaciated everywhere. So deteriorating plant threatens mass extinction around the world because of radioactive fallout. So I went out and done the species counts. The species are exterminated. For sure. Not maybe, not almost. But they're exterminated. I know because I went after year after year. Year after year.
We're leaving Port Hardy.
I went up and down the coastline, and we've done the species counts. This is not an opinion. This is a fact. We have documented it. And I've stayed out for 4 to 5 months at a time. The species are all gone. This video here is right up by Alaska. So the coastline should look like to the left at low tides, 18-foot tide exchange. To the left is what it's supposed to look like. So Alaska is wiped out too because I'm 10 miles away from Alaska. I'm coming in at low tide with an 18-foot tide exchange. And there's nothing there, no color whatsoever. That's an extinction event.
Gonna go take a pee before it takes off?
Now, I've done that year after year after year. The species are actually missing. And normally, this is what you see on the coastline to your left. But now, in the same place to the right, it's exterminated. And this is typically what it looks like on the coastline each day for me. It's rarely perfect conditions,
Hey, Zoe. A little too rough out there. And a few waves right here. I don't want to stay
That was
around
right
here
by
very long.
Alaska, a few miles away from Alaska. The most northerly point in Canada. The most northerly point in Canada, that last one. Deflated the pontoon that day. Washed up on the rocks that night in a hurricane. Okay. So now you know a little bit about me. I've been doing this for years and years. I'm on the East Coast now. There's no spiders in the woods. There's no ants in the ants' nest. Lots of ant nests, but no ants in them. There's no fish jumping in the pond. There's no flocks of birds flying in the biggest migratory... We're the migratory capital of planet Earth. 45 million migratory birds a year cut through here on the East Coast in the Atlantic. I'm about 12 miles away from the most easterly point in North America. In paradise that's now desolate. So I'm just going to run you shortly through a small history of the die-offs. And you'll see that starvation and emaciation is the common thread for all of these stories. Alaska seabird die-off continues for another summer. 2018, emaciated and starved. Got storm petrels, fulmars, shearwaters, kittiwakes, auklets, and puffins. They all got one thing in common, is they're emaciated and starving. By the way, the storm petros, I'm about 60 kilometers away from the biggest gathering. It's called Waterloo Island. I went there in the last 2 years. I couldn't find them. I go there in the dark because they're nocturnal. There's supposed to be 6.6 million of them out at this island, but I couldn't find them. And so far this year I haven't made it out there, but the migratory is good until the middle of November. So I still might make it, is what I'm trying to say. We haven't been noticing any salmon up here. This is the west coast of British Columbia. Now remember, bears, 95% of their diet is berries and grass and roots and mushrooms and stuff like that. Not salmon. So they're trying to switch the narrative that the bears, the grizzly bears, are emaciated because there's no salmon. But bears don't just eat salmon. The problem is the salmon are so radioactive, the bears actually have leukemia because they're bioaccumulating the radiation. Berries are the worst thing you can eat, and mushrooms, because they suck up a lot of radiation. In British Columbia this summer, 5 million sockeye salmon expected to return to spawn. Only 600,000 came. And local grizzly bears are bearing the brunt of it. But grizzly bears eat mostly berries and roots and grass and stuff like that, not salmon. So they're trying to frame the narrative, right? 2016 mystery mass deaths of Alaska birds baffle scientists. Tens of thousands of dead birds washing up on the beaches. And I showed you the pictures earlier what the beaches should look like. If there was food there, they wouldn't have died, right? The birds, all of a species known as the common murres, there was over 1 million of them washed up, appears to have starved to death. And they appear emaciated. Well, they don't appear emaciated. They're either emaciated or they're not. Their stomachs, we know they are starving. Their stomachs are empty. Unprecedented number of dead whales have washed up in Scotland and Ireland. All kinds of species in different stages of decomposition. Whales won't stop killing themselves in New Zealand, for instance. That's an appropriate headline. These are something we've never seen pre-Fukushima. 5 giant dead whales all wash ashore near one another. The giant whales all washed up. They were actually emaciated. Puffins, now this story in 2008-16, puffins are starving to death in incredible numbers. But think about how the scientists framed this narrative. They said, dead puffins are washing up on an island in the Barents Sea at an alarming rate. In 10 years of monitoring, we've only seen 6 puffins wash up in total. A professor who coordinates the West Coast Volunteer Bird Monitoring Network says, in just shy of 3 weeks, he's seen 250. And scientists believe the actual numbers of dead puffins is much higher, to the point that half the puffins population in the North Pacific may be dead. So by finding 250 dead puffins, they extrapolated that half the populations of millions must be dead. So when you find 5 dead whales on a beach, it typically means 50 died and you found 5 of them. Finding 5 of them washed up alongside each other on the same beaches is the norm. The cause is no mysteries for the birds. The birds are simply starving to death. So you can see the confusion in the way they frame that narrative. Going to 2017, the next year, federal government issued a disaster declaration for Alaska's pink salmon, the chum. But the true amount of dying marine and bird life in the area is astonishing. So it wasn't just salmon, all the species were dying. Federal government issued a disaster declaration for Alaska salmon fisheries and several other salmons and crab fisheries along the west coast. And the collapse of the Alaska salmon fishing is not the only problem hitting the northwest coast of North America in the last couple of years. The amount of marine and bird life dying in the area is astonishing. In November, National Geographic published huge, massive puffin die-offs. Hundreds of birds washing up dead in Alaska and causing alarm among scientists. And they claim it's maybe linked to climate change. I showed you climate change. It's called radioactive fallout. I'll show it again to you. This is climate change. This is a plume from Fukushima radiation, pulsing energy every second. That's going to go on for thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. The planet is just going to get hotter and hotter by the day. Because that's pure energy pulsing at the speed of light. And not only that, there's so much of it, it's an invisible snowstorm. The radiation pulses at the speed of light are hitting each other and then changing direction. It's known as the Bromson lung effect. That's the German word that I probably butchered. But what it basically is, in translation, is braking. So the speed of light, the pulses hit each other and change direction. They brake and change direction. That creates an additional effect known as like X-ray and shine. That sterilizes the bacteria and the ants and the insects and animals that live on the forest floors, see? Because that will go on forever and ever and ever. And for 75 years, we've seen these kinds of plumes that are invisible. You can't see it or smell it or taste it or hear it or feel it or touch it or pick it up or throw rocks at it, but it's there. See my Geiger counter up there? It's there. We know it's there because we can find it that way. It's pulsing at the speed of light. The Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans claimed millions of BC salmon had mysteriously just disappeared. In 2015, seen a large number of dead, sick sea otters in Alaska. In 2015, it reported hundreds of dead walruses. This was a pulse, a radioactive pulse. So when the ice melted, all the radiation sank into the water at the one time. Remember, it was continuously coming out, so there was a lot gathered up. But it doesn't allow the ice to crystallize anymore, so you see all the glaciers disappearing post-Fukushima worldwide. Also in September, Kodiak Island, residents were reporting a massive number of common murres washing up dead on the local beaches. It was over 1 million of them. Hundreds of birds washed up dead or dying, apparently starving. A discovery of 4 dead humpback whales in BC water in a single week shocked scientists. Shocked the scientists. Just as Alaska was also experiencing a surge of whale deaths. And 2 days earlier, the Alaska Maritime National Wildlife Refuge was receiving multiple reports indicating a significant increase in dead and dying birds on beaches in a 2-week period. And a large die-off of birds plus fish and sea mammals reported in other parts of Alaska. And more dead whales found in the Gulf of Alaska following the death of 9 fin whale carcasses. And a report claimed 9 endangered whales were found dead during the past few weeks in Alaska on the 18th. So never before has so many whales died on the Brazilian beaches. Never before, ever. 103 in 2017 were stranded. And they said the increase in population of the species generated more deaths by natural causes. They were trying to downplay it. It's disgusting because it's the Whale Institute. It's called control opposition. But the reality was they never seen it before. And the whale population doesn't just explode because it takes a long time for whales to reach maturity. This is stuff they could have predicted if it was so. It's not just something random, see? But that's what they were trying to do to convince you. As researchers searched for explanations, the death of sea giants continued to shock the human population. Never before have so many animals of this species died stranded on the Brazilian beaches in a single year. We have never seen anything like it before. 337 whales are stranded on beaches in 2016, and the largest stranding ever in Chile. And it was endangered whales. 32 skeletons, 305 bodies, which meant that they were dying in increments in different stages of decomposition, which is what we've seen off Britain over the last couple of years, where they had 1,000 beaked whales, which are offshore deep diving whales, in different stages of decomposition washed up in a short period of time, which meant that at least 10,000 died. Because if you find 1,000, you assume that you're only finding 10%, right? But they had a total, they estimated 5,000 died in just a short period of whales and dolphins, which meant 50,000 died. Many of the remains were in advanced states of decay, and so it was unclear what species they are. But see, that's an emaciated whale. It's not, these whales are normally very thick. Indonesia rushed to save beach sperm whales, trying to save a pod of 12 sperm whales. And we see this in the United Kingdom repeatedly in the last couple of years, of pods of sperm whales, pods of this type of whales, pods of that type of whales, pods of these types of whales, pods of those types of whales. It's not just one species doing this, and this is extraordinary, never before heard of, multiple species washing up, different species. Okay. Bless their hearts, right? Trying to move a 50-ton whale and people power. They just all went to work to try to do it because they understood this was an extraordinary event, see? The elephant in the room is Fukushima radiation when it comes to the Pacific Ocean and Atlantic Ocean animal die-offs. And the government has totally failed to inform the public because the pro-nuclear industries capture key positions. Killer whales dying along the Pacific coast, sick and emaciated. Sick and emaciated. The owls all along the west coast are emaciated. The pelicans are all emaciated, eating the babies for food. Mass deaths of sea lions, dolphins, birds, caribou, high mortalities. Continuing trend of whales washing to shore, animals sick, starving, emaciated. 0 babies survived on the island of seals, usually over 15,000. Or no, birds, sorry. Marine mammals all along the California coast infested with parasites, extremely emaciated. Carts filled with emaciated dead bodies. The Pacific Ocean turning into a desert. Entire generations of baby sea lions lost. Babies being found severely emaciated. Now they're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses and parasites, right? Unprecedented. The largest animal on Earth found dead on the West Coast. Very sick, very emaciated. Their food supply is disappearing, being killed off. Mind-blowing die-off of seabirds on their way from California to Alaska. Every bird they're seeing is starving to death. 100% death rates of baby seals on the California coast. None have survived. Unprecedented die-offs of nearly endangered marine mammals. More have washed up in the last few months than during all of recorded history combined. During all of recorded history. In just a couple of months showed up. And it didn't stop. Now entire coast is being affected. Whole populations and getting a pulse of radiation. A real shock to us. Animals of all ages sick, not only the newborns. Walking skeletons so hungry they were eating rocks. Now you remember the pictures I showed you earlier in the show. The rocks were normally covered in nutrition, right? But Fukushima exterminated it. Countless dead birds reported in the Pacific. Nothing will eat the bodies. The fish are not there. All of them are starving. Animals acting weird, sick and weak. Too weak to fly, too weak to run. Salmon covered in fungus, red lesions all over, beak gapping sores. 13 baby gray whales and 55 dolphins found dead on the west coast. 13 baby gray whales. Rash of dead humpback whales in Oregon. Corpses of seals, sea lions, birds, sea turtles decomposing with nothing feeding on them. Mysterious deadly black fungus being found on fish in the Pacific Northwest. Highly contaminated marine snow covered the seafloor. This is radioactive fallout they're talking about. Fukushima plume model showed 1 million becquerels a square meter. That's permanent. That's forever. 20 million particles, another study, of iodine-131 per liter fell on the US. That's permanent. Because it's not just iodine-131 in that sample. It's going to be loaded with up to 1,000 different fission products. 220 million atoms per liter. Just imagine, 5,500 miles away, a liter is 220 million atoms of just the iodine-129. It's absurd. That's nuclear fallout. So the elephant in the room is Fukushima. U.S. ambassador's letter for former Japanese ambassador. Worsening radioactive contamination of the sea will soon awaken the whole world. Okay. We burned down. I just want to cover this story here because North Korea is being used as a distraction. But what did the Americans and the British and the coalition do to North Korea? It wasn't Americans, it was the military-industrial complex, right? The misery machine. We burnt down every town in North Korea. They napalmed every community in North Korea. Napalmed every community. They used to call napalm cooking oil. More of that some other time. Seabirds starve. Now, there's a study just come out. Seabirds starve in stormy washing machine waves. It's from France. And France, of course, is... If you look at what they've done to the French Polynesians, they irradiated everybody in the French Polynesians and made them sick with nuclear bombs. Then they caused a coup in Niger, a civil war for 60 years, so the French can get cheap uranium for their reactors. It's revolting. Thousands of seabirds are washed up on the Atlantic coast every year, could have been starved to death by cyclones. Now, first off, we've seen cyclones been around before Fukushima happened, yeah? And so have... hurricanes and typhoons and everything else. And we've never seen birds die off because of storms. They're actually perfectly at home in the storms. The storm petrels only come ashore for breeding. They live into the North Atlantic for 10 months a year in absurd conditions. That's their environment. They were born and bred for that environment. Suggesting that storms are why all the birds are showing up sick and emaciated is why you can't actually trust academics anymore. How can you trust them after coming out with a study like this? Experts warning the phenomenon could worsen with climate change. And climate change, of course, is the radioactive fallout. Pulsing energy every second, heating up the planet and killing all the species at the same time with a radioactive soup. puffins, Cassini octoliths, guillemots, hardy little birds that nest in the Arctic, head south each year to more hospitable but isolated islands off Newfoundland, which is where I'm currently too. I grew up here originally, right? I was gone for 35 years. And now I'm old and busted up and we're down here doing research. The species are all gone. They've been exterminated. Excuse me. Imagine wind blowing at 120 kilometers per hour and waves 8 meters high. Well, that's normal down here. It's always been that way. That's normal. So what a disgusting thing to do is produce studies claiming that the birds are starving to death, not because of radioactive fallout, but because of storms that have always existed. Mass bird deaths reported in New York City. So birds flying into the Twin Towers, so to speak, right? The World Trade Center. It was an unusual event where it was a one-day event. It happened for one day where 250 birds they found around the World Trade Center. Which kind of reminds me of the 1,000 people that jumped out of the Twin Towers. There was no fire around them whatsoever. They stripped off all their clothing and then jumped out of the Twin Towers. It was because of directed energy weapon. They were in a great big microwave. Her task wasn't to take part in a bird count, at least not a count of living birds. She was taking part in a project, Safe Flight, an effort to track how many migratory birds die navigating New York. And in the 2.5 hours she spent surveying the World Trade Center complex in downtown Manhattan, beginning at dawn, she spotted hundreds of dead birds. It was actually 250. It was a particularly gruesome day for migratory birds in New York City. This was an event, though. This is not like this happened every single year. This was just a weird event. Nevertheless, 250 birds died at that building, and all the medias ran with that story endlessly, but they don't bother trying to articulate what's going on. They're trying to blame your tin cans and your pop bottles and your cardboard. They're trying to blame you. Mountain goat kills attacking grizzly bear. The grizzly bear was emaciated. That's crazy, though, the mountain goat killed a grizzly bear. It's crazy that a grizzly bear can even get close to a goat because they're amazing creatures. Parks Canada wildlife officials say a forensic necropsy autopsy determined the 140-pound female grizzly bear. That's emaciated, having killed by a mountain goat that stabbed the grizzly bear in the armpit and the neck, the throat probably. 70 kilogram. Like, my goodness. And nobody's bothering to say that that's extraordinary. Small. Normally they weigh at least 200 kilograms to females. 230 actually on average for the coastal bears. It's a big cry from 70 kilograms. That's emaciated, see? That's less than 1/3 of its healthy weight. Because they got leukemia from eating so much radiation. The female grizzly bear was on the small size for a bear in the Rockies, weighing about 70 kilograms. So, because normally I'm not going to cover a story like that, but I am going to cover a story. There's no evidence she had cubs, and she was only 70 kilograms. Tasmanian salmon industry detonates underwater bombs to scare away seals. That's an interesting story. Tasmanian, which is New Zealand, 3 major salmon farm operators detonated at least 77,000 underwater. These are little bombs, right? It's just a terrible thing to do to the animals. The animals are starving. This is why they're using so many. The seals and sea lions and predators are actually starving. This is why you see this increase of that. Whale carcass prompts emergency response. Cause of death probed. So does this sound like it's something normal? It causes a panic. There's a dead whale. It's a total panic. This shows you, though, what's going on in the background. See? Carcass of a large humpback whale, and there's an unusual mortality event for humpback whales, is floating in the waters off the Great Kills Park on Friday, prompting an investigation. Well, the first thing they're going to try to, if there's any, they're going to look for ship strikes. You desperately want to blame it on a ship strike. And a floating whale will get hit by a ship a lot easier than a live one. The carcass is expected to land on the beach Friday afternoon. It's like they're in panic mode. We asked the public to stay away from the whale. So originally when I seen that, I was thinking, is that the United Kingdom? Because that's what the United Kingdom does. Go near the whale, we'll arrest you. The Queen owns the whales in the United Kingdom. The team is following the Long Island Sound Large Whale Response Plan. Long Island Sound Large Whale Response Plan. Because all the communities on the coastline now, since Fukushima, have that kind of system set up. And you're not invited. They don't want you taking pictures. They don't want you going near it. They have a plan set up, a response plan. The police will come in, the Coast Guard will come in and keep the boats away. The police will keep spectators away. And this same group, funded by NOAA, will show up and pretend that they're investigating it. NOAA. Experts are probing increased deaths of whales along the Atlantic coast. The Atlantic. And discovery attracted the attention of walkers, runners, cyclists, and other visitors to the park. What's that out there? That's not a hockey player or a football player or a basketball player. Get that whale out of here. Elevated humpback whales mortalities have occurred along the Atlantic coast from Maine through Florida. All the way from Mexico, all the way to Alaska is more like it. NOAA declared it an unusual mortality event. I showed you that at the very beginning. While a portion, a tiny fraction of the whales have showed evidence of pre-mortem vessel strikes. Desperate to blame it on vessels. And we see them do it with whales that are completely emaciated. They go from 12 inches of blubber down to 3 inches of blubber. And they're like, I think it was killed by a ship strike. All the media's out there. Yeah, it's emaciated, but I think it was killed by a ship. Damn ships. And for the last 3 years in particular, we've seen this narrative just explode out of the blue. This finding is not consistent across all whales examined. No, it's just a portion, a tiny fraction. Dead whales are easy to get hit by a ship. And so the whales blew up in an apparent whale carcass. That's some real journalism right there, I tell you what. An apparent. No, that's a whale carcass. Everything is fenced off. Unprecedented seabird deaths out in the United Kingdom. Now this is the BBC, where Jimmy Savile raped over 1,000 children at the BBC for over a 30-year period. There's no way the BBC didn't know that was going on. Unprecedented seabird deaths on the northern coast, a mystery. Hundreds of guillemots and razorbills and small numbers of puffins and kittiwakes have been affected, but the cause of the suffering is unknown. Ruled out the bird flu and is investigating other possible causes, such as poisoning from algae blooms. Like we've seen that narrative for the common murres and the Cassini auklets. It didn't pan out for them. But they kept that narrative going for at least 2 years before they finally admitted it had nothing to do with it. Those things are real because you kill the phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestering chain off, and you will get these blooms, right? So it's real. And because that's what happened. We killed off most of the phytoplankton and the zooplankton because they're surface feeders. They're right in ground zero for radioactive fallout. Over recent weeks, carcasses have been found along the east coast of Britain, from Orkney down to Northumberland and North Yorkshire. So spread it over a large distance. The birds are emaciated, little more than skin and bones, with many half their usual weight, which is catastrophically low. Emaciated, all over the coastline. They have been seen feeding very close to beaches and among swimmers when normally they steer clear of people, and have been observed up to 20 miles up rivers, freshwater rivers. These are not freshwater birds, these are saltwater birds. So that's statistically important, that kind of facet. Last year we covered quite a few incidences of whales going way up rivers, including here in Canada, where one went all the way into Montreal Harbour. And no one's ever seen a whale in Montreal before. It was a humpback, right? That was emaciated. The facts we're seeing lots of them in unusual places suggest that this bird wreck, which is what they call a mass die-off, a wreck, is something quite different. So the next UK, I hate UK, United Kingdom media. My God, boy. I always feel bad for the people in the United Kingdom because they got the worst media, the most despicable media, the most despicable universities, and the most despicable governments. And Australia is right up there with them, by the way. Climate crisis. So the very first two words, they're trying to frame that narrative. Before you read anything else, then thousands of seabirds found dead and starving. Climate crisis. And what is climate crisis? It's radioactive fallout. Covers the entire planet in radioactive fallout. And then everybody, all the species, we're at the top of the food chain, but all the lower species, basically they get the radiation in their body. Their body has so much radiation bioaccumulated, sequestered in their muscles, their organs, and their bones. They have leukemia. They're producing so many white blood cells because that's what happens. Your body immediately, insects, birds, animals, mammals, everything, their bodies will attack the radiation with white blood cells. The white blood cells are displacing the red blood cells that is carrying oxygen and nutrition throughout the entire body. See? So this is permanent forever, though. So you have no oxygen in your body. You're much more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless and benign and innocuous, right? And 1,000 seabirds found dead and starving, along the Scottish coast over a big distance, and with climate change being blamed by some experts, and they don't even bother trying to name them. Climate change is a throwaway diagnosis, it's a garbage can diagnosis. The sheer number of carcasses discovered, including those of guillemots, the razorbills, the puffins, the kittiwakes, and we only found a few puffins here on the east coast, in the biggest migratory spot on the planet, by the way. No kittiwakes, no guillemots, no razorbills. And the birds are emaciated, a little more than skin and bones, with many half their usual weight, which is catastrophically low. So the same sentence, see? They all like doing that. They generally want to give you the exact same paragraphs with the same pictures and the same author, so everybody has the exact same conversation. So we got a poll running. Let's have a check on the poll. Hello, Mr. Poll. We got 29 votes. Should we grind up and feed pro-nuclear lobbyists and nuke scientists to the emaciated whales? Because I couldn't put any more words in there. Emaciated whales, emaciated birds, emaciated seals, emaciated seal lines, emaciated walruses. So we got 90% saying yes, but bizarrely we got 10% of people that are saying we shouldn't grind up the pro-nuclear lobbyists and nuclear scientists. What's wrong with you people? What are you talking about? Of course we should grind them up and feed them to the emaciated animals. That's the moral and ethical thing to do. Keith Marley, who runs the Newark Wildlife Rescue Center in Aberdeen, sure. Hang on. I got a really dry throat tonight. I'm dehydrated. We got the cover on the garage, the temporary garage that I built, the 20-foot by 12-foot. Because desperation, I had to move a bunch of stuff out of the place. Going to move the studio. I'll start tearing it down tonight. I won't get much done. I'll have to sleep because I'm burnt out. And I'll get up early and start tearing down all the equipment, bring down the scaffolding, all the lights, the sound system, all the equipment, the TriCaster, the cameras, and all the just get everything packed away and start moving everything tomorrow. And I won't be back online till Monday, Tuesday, probably Tuesday. And before I forget, because I'm burnt out, Colette donated $150. Thank you. We desperately needed it. That's a prime time right now, so that's a huge deal. That was a really, really pleasant surprise for me tonight. I seen that just before I went live, so thank you again. Just in case I forget to acknowledge it to later, because I'm so burnt out. I got a tendency to do that when I get burnt out. So, back to the story. Climate change. The sea of the East Coast warms up. Sand eels, whitefish, and other traditional prey for seabirds appear to be moving deeper underwater. Well, that's not how it works. The fish are not going to leave their generic habitat. Their generic superior... they're the genetic superior selection for those ecosystems. They're not just going to say, well, I don't like it here, I'm going to go deeper. It doesn't work that way. That's their habitat. That's their environment. Like, as a commercial diver, you go down in their environment, they're going to attack you. I've had little fish this big come up and slam into me because I'm in a space. It doesn't care how big I am. It has a reflex, right? He said that while his center had been able to rescue songbirds found on the beaches nearby, many were so badly starved by the time they washed up on land that even if they were still alive, there was nothing that could be done for them. The numbers are totally unprecedented. Unprecedented. And carcasses were picked up inland and along rivers, which is extraordinary because these birds don't go inland. They're saltwater creatures, right? Port Angeles says, I voted to grind. Now we got 30 votes and 13% is saying don't grind up nuclear scientists and pro-nuclear lobbyists. Party poopers, eh? What's wrong with you, scum? Of course you got to grind them up. They're the reason all the animals are dying, for goodness sakes. How dare you say no to grinding up nuclear apologists and nuclear lobbyists, nuclear scientists? I mean, that's the moral and ethical thing to do. By the way, like I had a lot of people saying that's what we should do. And so I decided to have a poll because there's so many people said we should grind up the scientists and feed them to the emaciated marine life. And so I put it up there more on a lark, right? Just to get a giggle out of people. I didn't really expect anybody to even vote on it. It's more of a lark, right? It is funny though, yeah? You gotta admit that's funny. Should we grind up and feed pro-nuclear lobbyists and nuke scientists to the emaciated whales? I don't know about you, but I find that funny. That puts a smile on my face. And so the climate crisis, they can't prove it's climate crisis. Now everything that happens, it was climate change. The judge, why were you speeding? Oh, climate change. Okay, case dismissed. You're late getting home and your partner says, why are you late getting home? How come you didn't pick up the Chinese food? It was climate change. Of course, gee, I never even thought about it. Good stuff. How come you're late for work? Yeah, climate change. Just take the day off with pay. We're seeing climate change now for everything. For everything. If you wear odd socks and somebody notices, all you do is say climate change. Climate change. They're using it now to cover up everything to do with nuclear, though. Nuclear is climate change. Again, that's radioactive fallout covering most of the planet in just the first couple of weeks. It's a continuous plume. It's not like it's a plume that's moving along. It's one great big massive plume that's going to live forever. We are going downhill at 1,000 miles an hour with no seat belts on. Not that it matters. No airbags. And we got the nuclear industry behind us, shoving us. The nuclear industry, it's the nuclear industry or 8 million species. What's the point of keeping nuclear if you're going to lose the 8 million species? You lose the 8 million species, we all lose. Global warming, climate change, scumbags. How colorful collars can help reduce the number of birds killed by domestic cats. I threw that in there because that's a great idea. Everybody loves their cat, but nobody wants the cat to be bringing home dead animals all the time, going to killing the animals and bringing them home, right? So if you dress your cat up like a clown, in fact, we should do that with nuclear scientists. All nuclear scientists should be painted yellow. That way, when we see someone painted yellow, we know to cross the street. Because they'll eat your children's brains, right? So your children can learn that they're dangerous. Climate change. Poor cat. But hey, it works. This was an interesting story. Bee stings believed to have caused the death of 63 African penguins. This is just honeybees, by the way, in Western Cape Town. It's extraordinary because it happened over a wide range and it happened in other areas too, like zombie killer bees or something. It wasn't just in that one spot. That's unprecedented, yeah? Killing 63 of them. They found a lot of dead bees there, so you kind of got to go along with it, right? I thought that was a pretty interesting story. This, there's no story here, but cormorants spotted around Waterloo region. Do you get it? Now, on the West Coast, when I was doing all the expeditions out there, because of Fukushima, each year we noticed less and less cormorants, and then the last year I was out there doing the expeditions, there was no cormorants. Now you're finding them in central Canada, that's what that is up there, Waterloo, central Canada, Ontario, and they don't have them there. And we got them here. In fact, there's a little pond over by the new place Just this little tiny pond, sterile pond. Yesterday, I couldn't believe my eyes. Here was a cormorant sitting on a rock. And cormorants are not indigenous to here. But out off the coastline here on a couple of trips I managed to get out there, seen over 300 cormorants in one spot, coexisting, by the way, with the seagulls. They were mingled together like they were having a party. It was extraordinary. But Ontario hates them. They have open season on them. You don't need a license. You're allowed to kill 15 a day, but you haven't got to prove it. So you can kill 1,000 a day. No one's going to question you. They actually despise them. And they're new there, right? Described as spooky ducks. And they eat like a half a kilogram a day. The loon actually eats a kilogram a day. It's the apex predator. Cormorants spotted around Waterloo region. I thought that was a really bizarre headline anyway. Massive stranding of seabirds during the winter of 2014 on the Atlantic Ocean. I just want to talk, because we didn't cover this particular story. From January to March 2014, more than 43,000 seabirds were found dead or weakened on the French Atlantic coast. Is exceptional because of its scale and its location, since there is no known precedents on the French Atlantic coast, which is the same coast as the United Kingdom where all the birds died in the last couple of days, right? It's ongoing, and they haven't given us any updates on it for some reason. Cyclones can be fatal for seabirds, but not in the way you think. Again, we see that narrative now, and it's the degenerate, coward popular science. They were bought by public relation firms about 25 years ago, and that site has been weaponized now by the public, by the lobbyists. They're guns for hire. That's what popular science is. They're pro-nuclear, and they're incredible degenerates. They're unimaginable, hideous, monstrous degenerates. Popular science. I absolutely hate their guts for what they've been doing over the many years. Guillermots dying in unprecedented numbers off the UK coast. I love these birds, They're gorgeous birds. Amazing divers. The seabirds reportedly been found starving, emaciated, and closer to shore than normal. They're usually offshore open water birds, and you will see them in heavy fog when you're off the coastlines, especially over here on the east coast. And climate change. Oh, and lack of food have been suggested as causes, but the exact reasons remain unclear. Fukushima has broken the food chain, see? There actually is a repercussion for these plumes, these invisible snowstorms. If that was actual snow, imagine the entire northern hemisphere having a snowstorm at the same time. Everywhere. Sustained for months and months and months, and then years, and then decades, and then centuries, and then millenniums. Because you can't see it or smell it or taste it or hear it or feel it or touch it or pick it up or anything, it doesn't exist. But see, that's what the Geiger counter does. Now, my Geiger counter only reads just gamma. It's not picking up neutrons, it's not picking up beta, it's not picking up alphas. And neutrons is one you're worried about, by the way. Dr. Alex Bond, senior curator in charge of birds at the museum, says that while mass guillemot dying events known as wrecks aren't familiar, which they actually are, this one is different. Apologists, What's unusual about this is the time when wrecks normally occur in the winter, and these are often associated with bad weather. Again, that's simply not true. Right? He's regurgitating that study I showed you earlier. It's disgusting. I spent most of my life on the ocean. It's simply not true. guillermons spend most of their time underwater, not on land, so a big storm can beat them up. A bit? No, that's not how that works. The ocean is their environment. They're completely at home out there for 10, 12 months a year, or 10, 11 months a year. Then they come ashore to lay eggs, raise a chick, and then they're back on the ocean for the rest of the year. The facts we're seeing lots of them unusual places suggest the wreck is something quite different. The mass die-offs. They spend most of their lives at sea. So if storms are going to kill them off, then there wouldn't be any birds. They would all be killed off because there's nothing but storms out there. Hunting for fish like herring and hake and anchovies and squids and sardines. And they only come back to land to rest and lay eggs. And in the last few weeks, concerns have been raised as reports of birds coming in close to the shore and heading up rivers started to roll in. And so all the public relation firms emaciated. Emaciated. Mistreated seabirds gathering on the British coastline and rivers who are starving to death. Unable to fly and instead swimming and diving. They're amazing divers. The common murre dives 600 feet all day long. Comes up for 30, 40 seconds, goes straight back down again. They can do that all day, every day for its whole lifespan. Another hundreds of birds dropped dead on a cruise ship, open deck. Hundreds of birds were discovered dead on a cruise ship in 2020. That spooked the daylights out of these people, eh? Birds keep falling dead from the sky, at least 1,000 in Missouri, 650 vultures, and 50 in India. And they show, in that story, they actually show the plume from Chernobyl. That's the Chernobyl plume. Look at that. Wow. Talking about dead birds falling out of the sky. And below it, they're showing the Chernobyl plume. Beautiful birds. They really are amazing. Just gorgeous. However, reports on further vulture deaths from across the country have complicated matters. Mass death of seabirds in western U.S. is unprecedented. This is 2015 story. Auklets from California to Canada, and they're starving. The Cassini auklets. There's actually over 1 million of them. They were trying to blame that on red tide, but you don't get red tide from Mexico all the way to Alaska. But you probably will in the future because Fukushima has killed the ocean's ability to produce oxygen, right? Emaciated. Unprecedented mass deaths of seabirds in western U.S. baffles experts. The sheer number over such a large real estate, the whole country, the whole coastline. So in 1983, there was 57,000 different species that died. So what was going on in 1980s? They were just skin and bones. Well, 1980s was major nuclear bombs had been set off for many years in a row and were still being set off, right? Agricultural critics presses for answers after another salmon die-off here in Newfoundland. Last year they lost over 2 million salmon. We just had a hurricane come through. 90,000 salmon allegedly died in this hurricane, Larry, that came through. Remember that? We were doing the shows and we were having that hurricane. Now, during the Atlantic Ocean is one of the coldest oceans. Therefore, it should have the most oxygen. But they're blaming it on hypoxia. So the ocean bombarded from the surface to the ocean floor with radioactive material pulsing energy every second. The ocean's not producing oxygen no more because the surface is the biggest producer of oxygen. This is where the phytoplanktons live, in the bases of the food chain, the bases of the oxygen chain, the bases of the carbon sequestering chain. And so all the radiation is falling through the surface first. And this is why you've seen a lot of whales that live on the phytoplankton showing up emaciated, because they bioaccumulate so much radiation from consuming the phytoplankton. And now the phytoplankton's numbers have diminished to almost not finding any. So the sudden low dissolved oxygen levels, sudden. So normally a storm, the waves are hitting the coastline and they're busting up and they're sucking up oxygen. And then the waves, the oxygen water goes back underwater. That's another way the ocean makes oxygen, is the waves hitting the coastline. It breaks up, turns it into like a froth, right? Where it absorbs oxygen, that gets back into the ocean. That's another way the ocean actually produces oxygen. But it's never done that. So when you got big storms, you expect more oxygen in the water, not less oxygen. But the plumes covered Newfoundland. And they cover the continents. So when you have a storm with lots of rain, what happens? A lot of the sediment on the coastline, on the continent, is washed down onto the coastline. So a lot of radiation gets washed down to the coastline during heavy storms with a lot of rain. That's called a pulse. So all this radiation comes flying down from the coastlines, washes out into the ocean. And then the ocean is stirring up the ocean floor, where a lot of the radiation has come down and landed. You're liberating that back into the environment too. But what's really going on though is all that rain. So you got all the pollen that's radioactive now, all the debris, the litter, the trees, leaves and everything are radioactive. This is why you're not finding any spiders in your forest anywhere here on the East Coast. It's absurd not to find no spiders on your coastline. It's absurd. The release said mitigation measures, including deeper nets and aeration. You can't aerate open ocean. This is absurd. They got investors, so they're just saying this stuff, right? So they're refusing to acknowledge that Fukushima happened. Again, we're seeing that over and over and over, where they refuse to acknowledge there's another facet to this equation that they need to work into. Making the nets deeper is not going to get rid of the hypoxia. We're seeing that, like last year, we've seen that happen all over the east coast of Canada. It wasn't just in that one spot. So Mowi to increase monitoring of East Canada area following suspected climate-related salmon die-off. Climate. So climate now is the Alexa for all of their issues. Will the insurance kick out now? If you got a die-off, will the insurance say, oh, that was caused by climate, so that covered under the insurance? Because that's what it's leading to, obviously. Marine biologists, local officials seek answer to recent fish kill. Again, this is hypoxia. The oxygen levels in some of the samples collected from the northern Biscayne Bay were extremely low, and the water was more green than previous weeks. These elements, coupled with warm weather and calm seas, can often signal a threat to survival for marine life. This is open ocean. By the way, the temperature in the Atlantic, instead of it being 50, my depth sounder is showing 59 and 60, which is extraordinary numbers. I'm heartbroken I'm not out there right now, by the way. And Biscayne Bay, I can't remember what I wanted to talk about. Hang on. This used to be a rare event, but Biscayne Bay is becoming less resilient and more susceptible to these events. So it's all the more pressing to prevent them. Studies ocean acidification, which is caused by radiation. What factors we can use to stop the ocean from having hypoxia? Well, you got to turn off all the nuclear power plants. You got to deal with all the fuel in the fuel pools because they're still splitting the atoms. So I see we got a spammer showed up. So we got 37 votes. Now we're down to 78% says we should grind up and feed pro-nuclear lobbyists and nuclear scientists to the emaciated whales, and 22% saying we shouldn't. It's absurd. Of course we should grind them up and feed them. What else are you going to do with a nuclear scientist? They don't really got another purpose. Their purpose, they won't go to Fukushima nuclear meltdown, then might as well feed them to the whales. We had crazy. We're at a tipping point with respect to the fate of Biscayne Bay. Hypoxia. So they blame it on septic tanks that have been there with broken sewer lines. Remember, we had one die off last year, and they were blaming it on rainfall washing sediments off the coastline. Well, it's been raining. It always rains, right? It's not like that's the only time it ever rained there. But Biscayne Bay is down in Florida. And remember, they had those hurricanes down there, right? And they had all those petrochemical facilities that caught fire and lost their inventories. You have nuclear power plants down there that had major events, right? Just up the coastline from that. And so they won't include stuff like that for some reason. They just want to blame your tin cans, pop bottles, and everything else. Why are so many manatees? Here's why so many manatees are dying in Florida and what can be done to help them. Really? And guess who these people are? They're with the climate, inside climate news. So they're going to blame it on climate change. That's their job. So they write in that article because manatees are dying, and they use that to bludgeon people with and say, oh, that's climate change. We're with the Inside Climate News group. So the people, think about how much influence they got because they're funding the studies. And it has to be blamed on climate, or what's the point of Climate News, Inside Climate, funding the study if they're not going to blame it on climate? See? Once again, it's a garbage can diagnosis. The animals are emaciated. Now, the seagrass, which is one of, they eat other stuff too, but seagrass they really eat a lot of, is wiped out right around the world. It's not just in Florida. And on my expeditions that I showed you earlier at the beginning, showed, 6 years of doing expeditions up along the coastline, 4 or 5 months at a time, showed the seagrass was dying everywhere, and the kelp too, with this weird, where the kelp and the seagrass was dying, in pieces of it would die. So it would turn completely white and translucent, while the rest of it remained healthy. Right, so radiation lands there and is pulsing energy every second. It kills those sections. Really something. 6 dogs up by Hanford, downstream from Hanford. There's a spot on the Hanford on Columbia River. Hanford is 585 square miles of nuclear waste. There's a spot on the Hanford River where it's 72 Seabirds doses right on the coast, on the shoreline, downstream. That's a lethal dose. So if you're in your speedboat and you stop and take a leak right there, that'll kill you. You'll die that day or that week from that dose. But downriver from that, because Hanford is always hemorrhaging into the river, because they got all these tanks. The tanks had chain reactions in the bottom of them, and everything leaked out of it. And this is stuff. Now, they also dump billions of gallons of nuclear waste directly into the soil. So every time it rains or snows, a lot of that ends up washed into the Columbia River. And so my first thing I'd investigate is if they've been poisoned by radiation. And toxic algae, the dogs are dying by coming in contact with the algae, which again, right, can be created by a dead zone created by radiation. It's beautiful. And that dog died by going down and playing by the water. And lucky for them, their kids didn't go down and play there too. An incredibly rare megapod of more than 100 humpback whales surround a boat off the coast of Australia. Australia has massive die-offs of whales over the last number of years, post-Fukushima. And humpback whales, of course, are shown up everywhere, emaciated. It's because they're not going to surround your boat if there's food there. They're going to ignore you and they're going to go eat. So when they say they surround the boat, this is exactly what they were doing. They weren't feeding, they surrounded the boats, see? When they're supposed to be feeding, they're supposed to be diving, they're supposed to be breaching, they're supposed to be going down and producing bubbles that'll come up and herd the fish. But they weren't. Low oxygen levels off the coast are concern for fisheries. So we're seeing that now, also all kinds of fresh water. But see, you know, they were dumping nuclear waste in the ocean for decades. Just driving along, throwing nuclear fuel over the side of the boat. Not slowing down, just throwing it over the boat, driving around in zigzags, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade. Many countries were doing it. They're all going to be dead zones. So when they say there's 600 dead zones on the ocean, it's infinitely worse than that. Way, way, way worse than that. And of course, climate change. Like, no matter what it is, climate change. Dana? Climate change. Like, really? You seen that tonight, didn't you? Every single story. Probably climate change. I mean, these are lunatics. There's no such thing as a journalist no more. Scientists expected a bad hypoxia season this year based on weather conditions in April, but had not expected the low oxygen levels to persist for so long. I get tired of these people really quick, eh? With additional information collected by the NOAA, excuse the language, NOAA, to show the low oxygen levels extended from Oregon to Washington. Well, the expeditions I showed you earlier, done just above Oregon and Washington all the way to Alaska, was a complete extinction event. I showed you that earlier. So why would Washington and Oregon be any different? If that's not Hypoxia, that's Fukushima. That's killed the oxygen production of the ocean. This is now the new one. But they're desperate to blame it on climate change. If it died, it must have been something to do with climate change, Dana. Chance of survival for baby orca. So this is really interesting. So you had a baby orca. They spent over $100,000 on that orca. But if that was a baby whale of any other type, it wouldn't spend a nickel. These are orca groupies. That's what you see going on all around the world. These organizations, this New Zealand, you see these companies, organizations show up rather, and they don't care about the other whales. They're worried about the orca. They don't care about the birds or mammals or animals or manatees or or penguins or anything. Orca. And no one's allowed near the orca. Once they exist, all the media will go out and interview them, regurgitate whatever they say. If you say, well, the orca wasn't flying high enough, and you're like, the foundation says the orcas weren't flying high enough. The ducks were above them. Like, this is a weird cult, is what you're seeing. Text messages showed shooting the whale while under sedation was the preferred method of killing it. Crazies. Beloved southern resident whale, killer whale, orca, beloved. They don't say that about humpbacks or greys or minke whales or anything else. They just say it about orca. And once these groups are created, nobody else is allowed to exist, just that one group. So this is not an accident, Bear killed after attacked forest department team. See, that's not true. There's 15 of them tried to put a net over the bear, and the bear fought back. So then, what? You can't fight back, so they shot and killed it. I couldn't believe it. The bear fought back. It was terrible. We had to kill it. Well, it was starving to death. It came into the community looking for food. The Bryde whale washed ashore on a beach in Vasey, buried after 24 hours. So they have this instant response now where they'll spend $50,000 to get rid of the carcass. Everybody go back to sleep. Nobody talk about the whale. It's gone. And this one was already decomposing. 43 feet, America's songbirds are dropping dead, and scientists don't know why. Common birds like blue jays, and blue jays are really robust birds, They're turning up sick or dead across the eastern U.S., but there's many different species of birds, not just blue jays, right? Starving. So they're starving on the coastline, they're starving for the saltwater birds coming into the rivers, and songbirds are starving. Songbirds that would eat insects or seeds are starving. There's lots of seeds out there for the seed eaters, because they're bioaccumulating radiation, right? And the overall bird population in North America declined by 30% since the 70s. If it was only 30%. By the way, what happened in the 60s and 70s and 80s? Oh, that's right. Endless nuclear wars. They call it nuclear testing. These things are nuclear wars. All kinds of countries detonating nuclear murder bombs, sending radioactive death clouds all over the planet. Yeah? Because whenever they talk about, they refer back to, it all started back in the 60s and 70s. Oh, in the peak of nuclear bombs is when it started, is it? Like, I didn't say that. No, because you're a coward. 2/3 of the birds in North America today face a greater threat of extinction as global temperatures increases as a result of human-generated carbon emissions. Carbon don't heat up the planet. Carbon don't pulse energy every second. Radioactive fallout does, though. Coal, oil, and gas doesn't pulse energy every second. How the hell is that going to heat up the planet? There's only one thing can heat up the planet is radiation. So all the fuel pools and all the reactors are still splitting the atom. They're still producing energies for millions of homes in the pools. Those atoms are absorbed into the water. 120,000 liters in each pool is evaporated each day. And that then is liberated trillions and trillions per liter into the environment. And most of the nuclear reactors are surrounded by farms. Right? I'll just show you a quick one because we want to finish out here. wait for it. This all nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging radiation. So what's the solution to nuclear if your fuel pool is hemorrhaging radiation? Well, Dana, this is really simple, Dana. The best thing to do is surround the nuclear power plants with farms. They'll suck up all the radiation, poison all the pesky people worldwide. What a strange thing to do is they built almost all nuclear power plants, and even future ones, are built in farmlands or surrounded by communities or both. Why would you surround a nuclear death factory, a disease factory, with farms? Why do it to almost all of them? Because you're going to eat the food and then you die. And that's what the industry is all about. It's about murdering you and all the species. You can pretend it's not, but that's exactly what's going on. This is why they're shipping food out of a nuclear wasteland, see? So you got all the nuclear testing, you got all the radioactive fallout, you got the ocean, you got just bomb testing in America, covered America with radioactive fallout, see? So the birds migratory through all this radioactive fallout, and now it's even worse. But hey, you know, birds can fly through trees at full speed, but they bang into buildings. Says, could be related. Could. It could. Yeah, could be aliens are pissing out of their UFOs, and that's what's killing all the birds too, you know. Climate change. And the planet warms up. No, the planet warms up from radioactive fallout, pulsing energy every second in an invisible radioactive plume that covers the entire planet. That's climate change. Carbon, oil, gas, oil, and coal don't pulse energy every second forever. Nuclear does. Nuclear's so evil, it makes me sick. Yeah, well, let's go check our poll again. Looks like we got spammed. How's the poll doing? Now we got, what? We got 43 votes, and 3/4 of them think that we should grind up and feed pro-nuclear lobbyists and nuclear scientists to the emaciated whales, but 25% don't? So this is just a one person with multiple accounts is what's going on. I got 370 subscribers in the last couple of weeks with a brand new site, but I could only get 37 people. That's the biggest number I've ever seen since I got this new site. It's 37 people. Yet I got 370 subscribers. You really think they all subscribe to me because this topic is an acquired. Only smart people are going to follow this topic. Only people that care and kind and considerate and intelligent people will want to learn the truth like this, right? The rest of them will go hang out at the scumbags like Fox and CNN. And look at this scumbag here, Stormy Gibson. In the back of my mind, I said, I really hope it's not a bird COVID. COVID, of course, is how they're hiding all the radioactive illnesses. It's the same thing, see? COVID also was designed to lock you up in your home and turn Earth into a prison planet, so to speak. Hoping that they're going to reverse the damage from the Fukushima nuclear meltdowns. Beautiful, and that are being exterminated by this disgusting, despicable nuclear industry. You tell me that's not gorgeous? Nuclear industry, like, it's scum, we gotta kill it. It's scum. It's life. It's pretty, so we got to get rid of it because it's good. Nuclear industry hates everything good. They despise everything good. Let's say goodnight to everybody. That's the show. I've done the research. This is not climate change. This is radioactive fallout from Japan. Everything is post-Fukushima nuclear meltdowns. All the mass die-offs, all the emaciated whales and birds and mammals and animals, that's Fukushima. And until you put it in the equation, then you're just a scumbag. If you don't put it in the equation, you're just being a useful idiot for the monster that will kill you and your loved ones too. Good night, Ted. Johnson. Michael. Angelica. HTM Sam. James Lucid. Hugs, my friend. Thank you so much for everything. Angelica turned on the troll tonight. Thank you. I usually don't give them the time of day because it's the same people over and over and over. If they're trying to have a conversation, fine. They got my number, they can call me. Not like I don't hide my number or something. I don't hide from anybody. I don't acknowledge the trolls because they're trolls. We've dealt with them for years and years and years. Warren, good night, everybody. James Oldhand, hugs, my friend. Good night, everyone. Hugs for everybody watching this later. Tonight, tomorrow, next day, the day after. I'll be a few days before I'm back online. I don't like it. We got 5 shows in the week. All sad shows, but good material. Dana Nasana. Hope you're doing good, my friend. I know you're having a tough time down there with all the fires and everything. I hope you find a few minutes of peace here and there, though. Port Angeles. Wow, lots of people here tonight. That's fantastic. ASAP. Boston. Sandra. Churchill. Scott Brady, Rob Rees, Angel Place, Swanee D will be out there in the morning. Remember, if you want to catch my recent videos after these shows, you got to go to my front page and go, I'll do it for you. Hang on here. So you go to my front page. So if you come here and the show is over, you got to go to uploads and go past live streams. Because my show won't show up here for 12 hours. Right? So as soon as the show's over, it's not going to show up on the front page for 12 hours. Google hates me. I've never seen that. Doesn't do that on any other site, just my site. They're really scumbags what they're doing to me. Josie Wales. Good night, everybody. Just scrolling through the name, make sure I don't try not to miss anybody. I always manage to miss somebody. Thinker. C. Brown. Thank you, C. Brown. Shared it on Twitter for me. Fabian Gong. Just trying to going through the earlier comments. I'm coming down to the most recent ones in a few moments. Parole. I only serve one king. Good night. Daryl Murray. Good night. Ella. Thank you. Cough mixture. Colette, again, thank you, Colette. Colette S donated 150. That's a huge deal. Thank you, sweetie. Hugely appreciate it. Dean's Sedacity. I can't even pronounce your name. I haven't got my glasses. My apologies for butchering it. And nuclear industry hates me, eh? No one's allowed to have a conversation under the scumbag nuclear industry for some reason. I provide the documentation of everything. And I don't hide away from anybody. Nerod Yeloft. Yeah, we had lots of comments tonight. And I had a couple of trolls. Pretty good night tonight. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. Thank you. Last glimpse at the poll before we call it a night was 46 votes. 72% thinks we should grind up the pro-nuclear lobbyists and nuclear scientists and feed them to the emaciated animals. I concur. Poll is a success. Despite the fact that we got spammed. Hi, Anna C. Did I get everybody? Okay, good stuff. Yeah, good night, Laurie. Thank you, everyone. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, folks, if you're watching this later. Tonight, tomorrow, next day. And I done another one 2 weeks ago. So there's lots of other information in the other one. You laughed. Yeah, that was you. Okay, that's it for tonight. I'll be back Monday or Tuesday by the looks of it. Everything goes reasonably well. I got so much work to accomplish in the next couple of days. It's just enough to make you sick to your guts. I haven't stopped this week. Literally haven't stopped. And so I can't wait till I get into the new place because then I can sleep in for a change. I desperately need to sleep in. But I desperately want to get out and look for insects too, but we can't do everything. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody soon. Have a wonderful night and weekend, folks. We'll see everybody in a few days. God bless.